This is Do It For a Living, your source for inside information on the future of automotive performance.
And today, what Installer's Edge represents is a full-service garage insurance policy representing the automotive aftermarket, where there's nothing they're going to install on a car that we can't insure on Installer's Edge, except for the safety equipment side, where if they want to do custom fab roll cages, the carrier just said, look, we're not going to get into safety equipment.
What's holding you back from starting or growing your business into what it can be? Well, if you're listening to this, it's not a lack of information. What you're about to hear is all you need to get motivated and start making waves. Do It For a Living podcast details the journey of today's true players in their own words. Find out how they broke out so you can too. The time is now. The time is always now.
Welcome back to another episode of Do It For a Living. I'm Kevin Dubois. This week we've got Franco Ganino with Alliant Insurance. This is a topic that we've been working to get going for our group and our community for quite a while. It's often a very misunderstood topic, and what Alliant Insurance does is they offer insurance packages for businesses, specifically in the performance industry, as well as manufacturers. It's something that seems to be kind of rare and something that a lot of people struggle to even find. So having Franco with us to kind of explain what they offer and what can be done for these types of businesses is, I think, very important. So it's not going to be your racer story here. We definitely this is definitely a business topic. So Franco, how are you doing today?
Really well. Thanks, Kevin.
So why don't you go ahead and tell us, how are you involved in insurance? When did you get involved with cars? Kind of bring us back to, this story of who you are.
Okay, so as it relates to what we do for the automotive aftermarket, I've been working with Alliant. We're a large commercial brokerage firm, originally founded in 1925 in San Diego. And as an insurance enterprise, it's easy for a broker to try to be everything to everyone. Monday, they're working with contractors, and on Wednesday, they might be working with an accounting firm. What's different at Alliant is we try to, from the beginning, early years, is try to create vertical alignment with industries and try to become specialists within those industries. And so I've been with the firm 23 years, and when I was hired, the president of the company, who was running different programs, saw that I had a marketing background. 20-something years old, 24 years old, and said, hey, look, we'd like to help, like you to help us grow some programs. And when I first started, I got involved with the Tow Truck Association. We grew a product for them, property and casualty, and our firm had already specialized in refuse haulers, and so I helped market the refuse program. And it was about a year and a half in that somebody said, hey, you really need to talk to this gentleman, Bob Corwin, my current business partner. Bob is doing something special with this association, SEMA, and you're a car guy. You might want to meet Bob. You guys probably have a lot in common. And so I drove up at the time. Bob was running our Ontario office. And Bob told me a little bit about his story. And it was interesting because at the time, Bob was currently managing, he was the risk advisor and insurance broker for the National Hot Rod Racing Association. And so he starts telling me about drag racing, and I had a big affinity for that class of racing. And we hit it off instantly. And the one thing that I brought to the table when I met with Bob is my marketing zeal, the thing that I wanted to do for SEMA, which was how do we build an insurance product that helped those members that might be struggling with it. At the time, Bob was fielding a number of phone calls. He had a number of high-profile clients that were building performance parts for drag racing, and what they were struggling with was trying to find affordable coverage or available coverage. If you were building a car to have 500 plus horsepower in eighth mile or quarter mile drag racing, a lot of those insurers at the time were like, hey, look, this is way too high risk. You need to go to the surplus lines marketplace. Right. And so these clients were trying to find coverage through a Lloyd's of London and non-admitted carriers. So what Bob and I did is we decided to approach SEMA. And it was fantastic at the time, meeting with SEMA and talking about our vision of how their association could have a buying voice, that no one insurer should struggle with buying coverage, and specifically buying it affordably. And so I told the president of my company, I said, hey, look, we're going to try to work toward getting an endorsement with SEMA and try to build out an insurance portfolio as an extension of member services. And I'm going to start walking away from some of these other programs that I've grown And it was the greatest decision I ever made. And the reason being is when you're car crazy, when you really have an affinity for the automobile on whatever your discipline is, whether it be off-road, which I love, whether it be road racing, autocross, which I love. I mean, it just was a natural fit for me to partner with Bob. And so SEMA heard our voice, and they saw our vision, and they allowed us with their partnership to form the Specialty Equipment Insurance Alliance. And if you went on SEMA.org and clicked on Member Services, Insurance is a tab on their website, and it takes you right into our URL, which is SEIAinsurance.com. And the goal of the Insurance Alliance was at the beginning stages to help manufacturers buy product liability. And for the first 10 years, we went coast to coast meeting with the most difficult product manufacturers, the ones you would think would struggle: brake component, supercharger, turbo. And then once we had a strong carrier partner helping us secure coverage affordably, we started growing the product portfolio. It went beyond product liability. We now do property, casualty, auto, workers' comp, all 50 states. It was a natural segue for us to focus on garage owners. And it was an interesting kind of evolution for us. We had just launched a warranty program called ProPledge for SEMA. SEMA really wanted to create a marriage between the dealership community and the OEs and the aftermarket community on trying to sell parts so they can restyle vehicles at point of sale. And this is before the collapse of the economy. And so they created a 3-year, 36,000-mile warranty. And as a result of ProPledge, any installer that was going to be working with these dealers were required to carry coverage. And most of the dealers would require a $5 million threshold of liability. Well, most garage owners struggle having coverage in it at any level, let alone having a $5 million limit of coverage. So what we decided to do is we knew we needed to have a deliverable. We needed to have a garage product that was readily available and affordable to deliver $5 million of coverage to satisfy ProPledge, and hence the birth of Installer's Edge. And it was interesting. Not only did we have that offering for people that were working with dealers, but the companies that needed it the most were our off-road clients who were calling us, hey, we manufacture lift kits, and this store owner is saying if they install a lift kit, their garage owner is going to non-renew them. And we said anything that ever impedes commerce that's a detriment to the aftermarket is a roadblock that we're going to take away. And so Installer's Edge started to grow quickly in the off-road space for individuals that were selling lift kits, and it became a real valued solution for the truck centers across the country. So you fast forward 23 years later, my business partner and I have built quite a team that we're out here in Southern California near SEMA, and we serve SEMA at every level, selling property casualty products, employee practices, directors and officers. We do some healthcare with the employee benefits team, and it's been a fantastic partnership for us.
Cool. So I wanted you touched on it a couple of times. You yourself are a car guy. And when I first started approaching your company, Bob was the guy who I got in touch with. He said, you are the better interview because you have built cars and you do this kind of stuff as a hobby. So give us some background on yourself. What do you do with the car stuff?
Yeah. So, when you have oil in your DNA, and I always say that, if ever I'm going to hit it off with somebody, there's going to be that connectivity. I had dinner with a buddy of mine last night, and it's interesting. He put himself through college by buying cars, restyling them and reselling them. And I said, geez, it sounds just like my path. I took auto shop, in high school. And although my father collected cars, he didn't really wrench on them at the level that I found myself wrenching on them. I owned 2 cars before I was 16 that I was going to build. They were Datsun 510s. I wanted to race autocross in the early 80s. And I found a Datsun Brie championship car, a race car that I was going to convert and race. And then I had a road car. And, the one thing growing up, although I worked I'm very fortunate to have Kramer Automotive hire me in high school. And Mr. Kramer allowed me to use his garage and wrench on my cars after hours. And that gave me my introduction. But it was really auto shop in high school that kind of opened my eyes up to all of the disciplines of how to troubleshoot and how to work on vehicles. And so as you start your career, every penny I thought I had saved was going to go toward cars. And I started buying British cars, interestingly enough, and played with British cars for a while, and got to a point where I just kind of hit a wall with them being, I wasn't curious any longer. I'd already owned MGs. I restored an Austin Healey. I restored a Triumph TR4, made a bit of a roadster out of the TR4 and raced it. And then I realized I needed to expand that. So I played with off-road. I started collecting Land Cruisers, restoring an FJ80. I bought an FJ55 and restored it, an FJ60, and kind of hit a wall with Land Cruisers and said, look, I really haven't played a lot in the American space. So at this point, my son's 13 years old, and I said, look, what do you want to restore? He had an affinity for Volkswagen, so we did a convertible Beetle. We finished it. It wasn't really what he wanted, driving around a convertible. It didn't really fit his life, and said, well, what do you really want? He wanted a bus. And I said, well, if we're going to do a bus, we're going to do, something special. I couldn't really find one that we wanted. So I finally said, why don't we get a van? Let's do a Dodge A100. And so I bought a Dodge A100, and we're just about to finish that this week. And we put all the soundproofing in. We're getting ready to install carpet. And then the last vehicle in my collection, believe it or not, I've owned a Bricklin. People say, well, why would you own a Bricklin? I said, well, how many people own a car with gull-wing doors? And it's the only car with gull-wing doors that has roll-up windows. So I was fascinated with that whole process. And then the last thing I'm currently in process of restoring, it just came out of paint, 57 Chevy wagon. So, I restore motorcycles. I play around with Vespa scooters. I just feel like that if you're really, really crazy passionate about all things automotive, there isn't any car that isn't going to intrigue you, because if you're curious enough about it, you'll find some wonders in every vehicle.
And I think what's important about this is being able to sell insurance to shops that do this custom work. You come from the background of understanding what is involved in it. And so when people call you and ask you questions, you know exactly what they're looking for and what they need. And that's
Absolutely.
something you don't get that when you call just a general insurance sales guy who does maybe just any type of like liability garage keepers insurance, right?
Yeah, no, what I try to find, again, going back to that oil in your DNA, when I brought on a key salesperson, and now we've got a few that are working with us on our team, and then my staff, I try to find people that have an affinity for the automobile. You should have a general working and understanding of the vehicle. For me, as one of the lead underwriters in my program, I think it's paid huge dividends. That when I'm talking to somebody and they're talking about whatever their discipline is, there is no end to my understanding of what they do. And if I don't understand it, because there might be some with technology today, and a lot of my clients are doing dyno tuning, we really want to understand what is their end result. How are they achieving their horsepower? I would say one of the most intriguing things for me is diesel performance. I just bought a Mercedes Sprinter, and and just fascinated with understanding how my clients like PPE goes about designing their products to push horsepower out of these diesel motors, and how much torque they're getting out of these motors. Mm-hmm. And so I would think, if you're really curious and you're well read, and luckily the internet gives us the greatest platform in the world to expand our understanding, there is nothing you can't understand about technology that goes into an automobile. And I think if I really want to know where the future is heading, that's all you got to do is be a fan of F1.
Yeah.
That's the groundwork. My commuter's a hybrid Lexus, and I know Infiniti got most of their technology from their F1 testing. So. It's fantastic.
I'm a big fan of F1 myself. I watch all the races too.
Yep.
Okay, so you have helped develop some of these programs for Alliant. Do you think of yourself as an entrepreneur? Is that something you have pushed for, as developing new products? You're not a follower. It sounds like you're a leader there, huh?
Yeah, no, I think that the beautiful platform that Alliant has given me is they allow us to run our enterprise as if we are a company within a company. And a lot of people get confused by that, because they said, well, why did you guys form the association, the Specialty Equipment Insurance Alliance? And I said, well, if we had to have SEMA file in every state, or we had to ask PWA, who's another association we work with, or even PRI, or even the NHRA. It'd be very difficult and cumbersome for them to do that. And what we try to say is, as an agency, if we're going to partner and vertically align with industry, we need to get that industry out of the insurance business. And one of the phrases that I coined many years ago that is the basis of our existence is we always say, we don't sell insurance, we help our clients buy it. And the goal is to help them buy it better coverage, broader coverage. And then, of course, the hook is when you have a buying voice, everyone understands risk purchasing groups, but it gets confusing in insurance because they think, well, wow, am I sharing risk with the other SEMA members? No, not at all. Every insurer stands on their own merit based on their experience, their pedigree, their loss history. No one client shares risk with another. We underwrite them completely exclusively on their own. But when you aggregate hundreds of people, the insurance marketplace, the carriers we work with, get very intrigued because what we're bringing to the table is the best in class. If we look at all our clients at every discipline of SEMA, they're the who's who of the industry. They're the founders of the space. And so we're bringing the best iconic clients to the table. Our loss performance as a group speaks for itself. And I don't want to get too much into that, but if an insurance carrier, for every dollar in premium collected, if they keep 6 cents, they're happy. They can pay 97 cents in losses. The reality is our program performs at a 30% loss ratio. What that means is that our carrier partners are elated with what we're doing and want to do more of it. They really want us to grow.
Excuse me if I don't understand the insurance industry very well, but your carrier partners, are those people that are like covering you when you guys pay out claims, or are they people that sell your products?
Okay, so that's an interesting question because a lot of people get confused with all the different names that we come up with. Alliant is a brokerage firm. So we work with every carrier in the world. We're appointed with almost every national insurance carrier in the country, and we have global outreach around the planet. And when we started looking at partners, we wanted to find carriers that had oil in their DNA, carriers that had a pedigree or experience working in the automotive trade. One of our best carrier partners today, if you're a fan of F1, is Alliant. Alliant is a big sponsor of F1. They insure 2 of the major OEs. Working with their underwriting team, opened our eyes up to a carrier partnership that was going to create instant synergy. Because when you're working with an underwriting community, a carrier that actually is the one that takes the risk, you want to work with somebody that has an equal or paralleled interest in the automobile. And if they have a great understanding of what we're doing and they have a commitment to what we're doing, it makes the whole world go around a lot easier for us because they're the ones taking the risk. So Alliant is a brokerage firm. We represent clients in industry, starting with SEMA and their membership. And our goal is to bring the right carriers to the table to ensure the insurance products that we're delivering to those members meets their needs and exceeds their expectations. So we need strong carrier partnerships like an Alliant. The other one is Nova Casualty. These are exclusive placements for us. So for instance, if a client has a broker who is struggling to find renewal coverage for them, and because their small agency is only appointed with maybe 2 or 3 carriers, call it a Travelers or Hartford, and Hartford says, hey, look, they're now doing stuff we no longer have any interest in, and they non-renew them, those brokers start to struggle trying to find coverage. And so if they were to call up Alliant will say, no, we're not really in that space. But if you call Alliant, they've got a program on an exclusive basis, you could work with them. And so one of the advents and the evolutions that really changed for us is not only do we take clients direct and solve those needs, but we also take broker phone calls where the broker's calling us saying, hey, look, we got this client. This is what they do. I'm struggling finding coverage for them. Can we get them into the Alliance? And of course, that's our goal, is to try to get as many people plugged in the Special Equipment Insurance Alliance and get them tapped into the insurance products that we have readily available to those members.
Okay, so you guys are you're obviously writing your own policies.
Yep.
Okay.
On behalf of our carrier partners.
Right.
Alliant does not hold any risk. A lot of people get confused because obviously we're Alliant and our partner is Allianz, but we say, look, we're an independent agent. And the most profound thing people to understand is the one thing about being an independent agent, the word independent denotes the fact that everything we do is client-centric. So if I'm negotiating a claim, I'm fighting on behalf of our clients. If I'm negotiating a final audit, a misunderstanding of alignment of coverage, if I'm trying to secure coverage, I'm trying to negotiate premium on behalf of our membership, I'm doing it completely client-centric. And it's hard for people to really embrace that because we underwrite on behalf of our carrier partners, but we have to represent our clients first. And so as an independent agent, our goal is to negotiate products with these insurance carriers. And ultimately, where does my responsibility lie? Yeah, I've got a dual role. I've got to make sure I can't lie on my applications. I've got to do everything with the utmost transparency as it relates to how we underwrite a client. We have to collect our clients' our carriers' premiums. We have to help them through audits. We have to help them with claims. But in the end, as an independent agent, again, everything is client-centric.
Perfect. That makes perfect sense now. Okay, so you guys do develop your own policies that you want to insure people with, but you're not actually underwriting it all. But you have partners such as Alliant to do that for you. So you pick the people that you want to cover. You write a plan or I guess an insurance policy for them that will work for their business, and then you present that to Allianz, and they say, yeah, like that's something we can work with. That's the gist of it.
The absolute goal for us is to take every business owner and custom manuscript a policy that meets their needs on whatever their exposure might be. I've got clients that have mobile dynos. Well, not every garage has a mobile dyno.
Right.
Once you take your equipment on the road, that's a different dynamic. So our goal is to ask the right questions. What is the ultimate need? Is it a lender-driven decision? This lender might require quake on a building that they're about to buy. Is it a contractual drive? We review leases. We review contracts to decide, okay, they're about to be a contingent sponsor for a race sanction. What does that mean? What does that exposure look like? And help every client customize their policy to meet their needs so they can go out and grow their enterprise.
Perfect.
And the policy is designed to protect their enterprise.
Awesome. So let's just start with Installer's Edge. I mean, you touched on that one as it started as like a 4-wheel drive guys who were installing lift kits. It's something that you offer to them. Can you kind of like give us an idea of what Installer's Edge is? And like you've run a couple examples of, like people who have a dyno or people who are installing lift kits or people who are like maybe restoring like classic cars. What does Installer's Edge do? And how does that help I guess a performance shop?
Well, like I said, it originally started as an extension of ProPledge because SEMA wanted to marry that partnership with the part suppliers and installers that are working with local dealers to restyle the car that's on the lot. So when the consumer walks onto a lot and says, oh, yeah, that's a really nice car, but boy, the one in the showroom with those lifted tires, lift kit and tires and wheels, that's the Jeep I want. And so the goal is to find an insurance carrier that would expand upon a normal garage policy and would give us some of the bells and whistles that we felt were important. Garage Keepers is a subset of a garage liability policy. And so we formed Installer's Edge to help the restyler that wanted to attract the dealer so they can do all of the exterior trim accessory installation for those cars. And then, like I said, then it started, what we realized is the lift kit stores really started calling as an extension of a lot of the off-road companies that we insure on the manufacturing side. And today, what Installer's Edge represents is a full-service garage insurance policy representing the automotive aftermarket where there's nothing they're going to install on a car that we can't insure on Installer's Edge, except for the safety equipment side, where if they want to do custom fab roll cages, that's the one bugaboo the carrier just said, look, we're not going to get into safety equipment. But as it relates to all of the performance tuning, customization of brake systems, lowering suspension, lifting vehicles, engine swaps, street rod building, there isn't a discipline in the automotive trade that we're not going to be able to embrace through the Installer's Edge product, which is a full-service garage product.
Okay. And you guys can sell that in all 50 states?
We're in all 50 states, yep.
Okay, so there's no excuse for people to not have insurance, right?
No, but the crazy thing is, you want to know so we're number one on Google. If you typed in a handful of keywords, people are finding us. And I'd say the number one, other than people going on SEMA.org and SEMA giving us direct referrals to their membership, what we're finding is a lot of people are finding us through Google. And
at the SEMA show, I started setting up meetings with key clients we recently added. And one of the interesting things was, so there was a gentleman up in upstate New York that specializes in high-end detailing. He actually has some very impressive clients where he goes into their homes, your typical Jay Leno's of the world, and would go in and detail at the highest level these very, very exotic and collectible cars. And his insurer at the time non-renewed him. And he said, I was struggling finding somebody that would allow me to work on high net worth vehicles. And our program loves that. And so we're going to partner with the Detailers Association to expand upon doing insurance for auto detailers. Well, and the list goes on of people that we meet at SEMA that are like, they have a specialized discipline, whether it be working, Nismo performance for Nissan, whether it be partnering with TRD on Toyota Racing Development, whether it be drag racing. Our garage offering, it has no roadblocks. We can go down any path regardless of the type of discipline of racing or automotive enthusiasm that the garage owner finds himself in, because the reality is what we find is, and the reason why I think our program is performing better than the average garage insurer, and there isn't a lot of garage insurers that likes performance garages, is our clients are high touch, low volume. The average garage owner needs to do 45 tune-ups a week. They need to push 6 to 8 cars out their door a day in order to make their business model work, because they're trying to compete with a $79 tune-up or an oil change that's $39.95. That's not our client. We do not want to be everything to everybody in the garage space. Our clients serve the automotive aftermarket, where the customer that's walking in the door is going to pay on average, 3 times more transactionally for their purchase, and is coming to that garage owner because they want the expertise that person brings to the table. So if they just bought a Corvette, and the Corvette's fantastic the way they're building them today, but if they want to customize it, because it's all about personalization of the automobile. That's what SEMA represents. How do I make that car look and feel and use it the way I want it to be used? So our clients, our garage owner clients, usually have an expertise in whatever their discipline is. It could be Mitsubishi Performance. It could be Nissan. They could be a Corvette guy. And what they're doing is they're transactionally bringing their expertise to the table on taking that vehicle and improving upon it, whether it be increasing its horsepower, increasing its handling, increasing the cosmetic nature of the vehicle. And that's, I think, the secret sauce of what makes us tick, because we understand that client is going to be, it's a high touch transaction and a low volume. They're not trying to push 36 Corvettes out their back door. So, and in and of itself, that gives us a safer, higher level of expertise. And it allows us to, gather some of the best automotive garage owners in the country, and the loss ratio is proving our success.
Okay, so you're obviously looking at what each individual shop is doing, and you understand that these guys may not be doing a lot of cars, but when they're modifying a Corvette to make double the power it came with, that they are an expert and they know what they're doing. And I guess that must reflect in their rates, I guess, is that they know what they're doing. And if you just gave any shop, the same kind of policy, it may cost twice as much because they're going to break every car they tune. Is that something you take into consideration as somebody's experience in that particular market?
Experience and expertise is everything. It just really is.
And what kind of credentials do you look for when you're insuring somebody? Is that something that is even available? Because we've talked about this in a previous show. Was people who are tuning cars, there is no. There are schools you can attend, but there's no accreditation. There's no degree. There's no there's no Alliance of tuners where you can be certified. And so anybody can do it, and anybody can take these classes. But there's no, I guess SEMA's an association. There's not something like that for tuning.
Well, SEMA's done a pretty good job over the years, and really even like TIA, for instance, we helped at that time with the tire installation. They came out with a tire fitment guide on how to customize a vehicle by altering vehicle diameter, width, and tire height. And And that was, a fantastic thing for us to see for the tire and wheel industry, especially our retailers that are doing that, to have a guide because there really wasn't an ASE certification. Today there is. They actually worked hard at developing the support of ASE, so these tire and wheel centers can now get their technicians trained on how to work with the consumer marketplace for custom tire and wheel fitment. That's just an example of what we'd like to see as evolutionary change in the industry. I agree, there is not a tuning designation. Do we look at ASE for leadership? You bet. Do we rely on experience to speak volumes for our underwriting decisions? Absolutely. But everybody's got to start someplace. It is not uncommon for us to have our business owners not have prior coverage. Many of them might have started from their garage or as an extension of their hobby. Mm-hmm. But what we try to find is companies that have worked in some other level of the industry. They might have worked at a dealership. They might have been an engineer at a manufacturing company. And the list goes on. I think the most rewarding thing that we would hope our clients are getting out of the engagement of working with us versus ABC Insurance Agent Middle America is we're inquisitive. We want to know what they're involved in. We want to know, if they're in racing, what does their club scene look like? What sanctions are they involved in? Because I think the most rewarding thing for us is when we get our referrals. When we ride a truck center in Tennessee and that truck center says, boy, we so appreciate all you guys have done for us in getting us insured when we were without coverage for 9 months after being non-renewed. You should work with this diesel center. It's a competing company here in our county, but we refer people left and right, and you should help. You should help this guy, Bill. That to us is the holy grail of our existence, because when we start connecting the dots, this business was founded on building these relationships and partnerships.
And this is actually a fear that I have as well, is I have insurance through, and I didn't even know you guys existed until we started talking, like probably about...
I hate when I hear this, but it happens all the time.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that, I'm in a very niche market with Mitsubishi Evos, right? So that's what I tune. And so the people I work with are people who are working on Mitsubishi Evos. Very small market. All the people that supply parts for me are very small, I guess, in the grand scheme of things. When you compare them to like K&N or Magnaflow, like those guys are the big guys. The people that I buy parts from are small. and so for us, or for me, I didn't know you existed, and I have insurance, but I have it through State Farm, and they have been to my shop, but I really question whether or not they understand what I'm doing, and I have this huge fear that if I ever do need to make a claim, that they will drop me immediately after. And that's something that I think a lot of shops share with me. So you guys obviously understand the risk, but what can you do, or what can shops do to make sure that, they do limit their liability? So if you are covering them, what do they do to make sure they don't have to make any claims? Because, I've been doing this for 10 years now, and I haven't had to make a claim. There are some that I probably could have, but I've always just eaten it because I felt like the cost of eating it is less than, not having insurance. So
yeah. Well, I think the biggest question we tend to ask is, A, have you read your policy? And most clients say no.
Right.
The challenge with not reading the policy is you don't know whether there's exclusionary language that could be damaging to the ability to afford coverage when you need it most. It isn't uncommon for us to see racing exclusions on policies. The other thing that I would say by reading the policy is you get on the general liability page, what is the rate base? What does it say they're rating you as? I can't tell you how many times I've pulled policies that we're reading for our clients, and it says they are something completely different than what they are. Just absurd designations, retail mercantile, and you're like, well, that doesn't say you're a garage owner. Do they know you're doing installation? The other thing we tend to do is we always say, hey, look, have a candid conversation with your broker. And the problem with going to a direct writer like a Farmers and a State Farm and an Allstate is you sometimes don't always have that expertise. You have an agent that represents your interests. Uh-huh. You might end up in a service center, and so there isn't anybody that's taking ownership, and so you're kind of grandfathered in, and then so you have to kind of rekindle that conversation with one of those service techs in their service center and say, hey, look, I'm just a little apprehensive that I don't have some answers to my direct questions. Can I engage in an email dialogue with you? and I want to put some things down in writing, and I want to get back from you in writing these answers, so I have a documentation in my file. And then the last thing I would say is ultimately, once you have all that back testing, is have another agent look at your portfolio, look at the policy, and get their opinion, because there's things that the layman consumer is not going to understand in an insurance contract that we do on a daily basis. And that's when I can't tell you how many times there's been eye-opening experiences where someone has a policy that excludes, let's say, product liability. And when you exclude product liability off a general liability form, you're not insuring the work that's being performed. So if there's bodily injury or property damage, which is the two major triggers on a policy, that someone gets hurt or in the process of me damaging something, I want the policy to step up and indemnify that third party, because I don't want my liquidity or the assets of my company being at risk. If you exclude product liability, you don't have that coverage. You don't have that defensible protection. And people are they're dumbfounded. How can that broker sell me a premise liability policy only? And I said, well, in their defense, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, when you signed a lease, your landlord probably said, hey, look, I need protection for my premise via the contract, and you need to show me as additional insured. Well, I can sell you a premise liability that gets you on the premise, but that doesn't mean I'm insuring your work. If I exclude product liability, it gives me the ability to sell a very affordable policy, $500 to $750. It gets you on the property and you're happy, and then you evolve over the years. And fast forward 5 years later, you've bought a bunch of equipment. No one's really looked at those asset vulnerabilities. They haven't worked with you on what equipment you bought. Now your property limits are really, really arbitrarily low. So you have an extreme risk there. And then, oh, by the way, you haven't really read the policy. You think you're buying a full service policy, general liability policy, including product liability. That's excluded. And all of a sudden, if you had that big claim, now you're uninsured, underinsured and uninsured. And so I would say have a broker look at it, whether it be us or another agent, and get that second opinion. The last thing we tend to do is we say, have you ever looked at the application your broker's completed for you? Because the application's a telling tale of what they're communicating to the underwriter, of what they're saying you do, and make sure there's an alignment.
Okay. And so something that, and this has happened with, and you touched on it just now, was that some businesses get turned down when they even specifically have like racing or tuning or motorsports in the name of the company. And you said
That's correct.
Policies have for other companies, and like obviously you guys will cover this stuff, but other companies will not cover people with those names because they assume that they are doing racing, and those companies realize that that is a higher risk, I guess product that they're delivering, and so if that's a higher risk, then they don't want to be a part of it. But you guys do allow those kind of names, and that is something that you guys are insuring, right?
We want complete transparency. It's interesting how, if someone really understands the decision making on the insurance carrier level, there's a lot of ways they think they can dupe the process. They say, well, if I have a generic name, instead of be calling, performance engineering, I'm going to say I'm PE Inc. And when I get on the phone with a broker, I'm going to tell them that we're just online distribution. We're just online retail. I'm not going to get into my installation. Well, inevitably, that would be a horrible way to start off your relationship with your partnership with your carrier. And it truly is a partnership. I mean, the premium that they collect is their asset, but the risk they're taking is the ability to step up and provide that defense when you need it most. And the last thing you want to do is have a misalignment with your carrier partner. And so for us, it's all about transparency. And the name, to me, is irrelevant. It's really the business process and the progress of how they're growing their enterprise, I think, is the reason we're successful, is because we want them to flourish in their space. If it's Mitsubishi Performance that you're involved in, we want every Mitsubishi owner in the country to know who you are, buy the parts that you provide and the service you provide, because you're the experts. Mm-hmm. And you're the one that's going to prevent them from having, dash lights blinking all over their like a Christmas tree on their dash. They can't pass CARB emission standards, and the tailpipe's failing, and they're struggling with keeping the thing running. And so it's just a horrible mess. All right. Someone coming to you is going to be able to deliver on making sure that their car is running at the level of performance that they intended when they wrote that check to buy those parts.
Okay. What does Garage Keepers actually cover? I mean, this is something that, again, I think is, as simple as it sounds to you as a question, like I think myself included and a lot of other people don't really realize what can be covered. So customer cars in your possession, tools and equipment, the building, employees, people. What are kind of some of the things that a garage keeper's policy, or even you can go into your installer's edge policies, but what does it cover?
Well, I think the one thing that people get confused about when they say garage liability is they say, is that different than general liability? And back in the day, a garage liability policy, was really designed to add coverage that a general liability policy was excluding, which is the dealing with getting in and around an automobile. And it allowed you to expand the coverage to garage keepers, which is a subset of a garage policy. Today, most insurers, and specifically us, we write a general liability, broad form general liability policy and add in the garage keepers, which allows us to offer 3 very specific coverages. General liability gives you products and completed operations coverage. So what does that afford? It affords the ability to say, in the course of my work, if I damage something or I injure someone, whether it be while I'm doing it directly or after I put it to its intended use. You've given the customer his car keys. He's now 6 months later driving down the highway, and use the example of the tire and wheel coming off and he gets in an accident. There's going to be consequential damage in a liability suit for injuries as a result of that failure to perform. Product liability extension gives you that. It gives you the premise liability. So you have to satisfy a landlord. You have to satisfy a tenant obligation. Personal and advertising liability, slander, defamation of character, wrongful detention. So a broad form general liability policy gives you all those things. Then you say, well, I also have a third party responsibility for the vehicle that's in my care, custody, control. Garage keepers is specific to that cover. It says if I take responsibility of someone's vehicle in my care, custody, control, I'm responsible for its well-being. If the fire breaks out in the middle of the night and that $60,000 car that's you're working on is damaged, I've got to reimburse that customer for the replacement of that vehicle. If I happen to one of my larger claims this year was someone doing a wrap on a vehicle and they forgot to set the emergency brake, and when they turned around it had rolled out of the garage, rolled across the parking lot and down an embankment. That's my responsibility. I've got to either repair or replace that vehicle. So garage keepers is an extension. And then of course all of the liability from a non-owned auto standpoint, driving the vehicle on test drives is an extension of that policy. Leasing vehicles can be added. We've owned vehicles, leased vehicles, employees using their own vehicles for company use is all part of that package. We expanded all the property coverages. You own a building. You're responsible for insuring the building via lease on a triple net. Business personal property, which is everything you own in the company. Tenant improvements made to the facility, equipment, inventory, manufacturing. We have the ability to add a manufacturing class now. So because we have companies that are hybrids. Mm-hmm. We currently insure companies that have all 4 exposures on their general liability form. They're a retailer of third-party vehicles. They're a distributor, business to business. They manufacture their own products or import their own goods that we insure from a manufacturing standpoint, and they do installation. We're the only insurer in the entire country that allows one organization to have 4 different rate classes, all based on sales, all individually underwritten, so it's not carte blanche. Oh, if you manufacture, let's say you import, let's say you're importing turbos from Australia or Germany. I get a lot of clients that want to sell German performance parts, and you're the importer of origin. There's no domestic coverage because the manufacturer is in a foreign land, so they don't carry any product liability in the U.S. Rather than us putting our head in the sand, which is what a lot of brokers tend to do, hey, you know what, seeing that's only 10% of your sales, let's just rate you as a retailer, and let's let the insurance carrier figure it out. That's a horrible disposition to be in, because now you're going to have a major claim, you have a meltdown, you have a detonation issue, whatever the case might be, and now you've got a $30,000 engine you have to replace, and they're expecting to subrogate, which is the carrier's responsibility to go after the negligent party, and they say, oh, the heating issue was due to the turbo. Let's go after and subrogate against the turbo manufacturer. Oh, wait a minute. There is no domestic coverage. Oh, you're the importer? We didn't know you imported. Well, you know what? We'll pay the claim, but we're going to non-renew you now. Uh-huh. That's what we're trying to avoid. So we have the ability to recognize manufacturing as well as importation of products. And like I say, there is no other garage insurer that allows a GL form to afford all 4 disciplines. So we're doing the property, we're doing the garage, we're doing the garage keepers, we're doing the auto. And then we added what's known as employee practices coverage, which is discrimination, harassment, wrongful termination being brought against the business owner as a result of an unfortunate employment act. And so, the good news is we think it's one of the broadest garage policies out in the marketplace. And unfortunately, the bad news is we're still the best kept secret in SEMA.
And so when you have these 4 different fields of coverage, it's not 4 separate policies for one company. It's one policy that covers 4 different things, right?
One broad form general liability policy serving all aspects of the business.
Okay. And you touched on the parts that people are selling and subrogating, I guess, the risk or whatever. Can you kind of like go into more detail on how that works? So like if I sell components from a person that may not have insurance on that product, you are looking to, or sorry, I should say, you would prefer if I sell products that do have insurance on their manufacturing side. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, a risk management strategy, ideally, you buy an insurance policy with the intent to never use it, right? You really want to avoid it. But in the end, when something bad does happen, you have to ask yourself, okay, we don't look for fault. Nobody intentionally damages someone's car. No one's going to intentionally do work that's going to cause injury to someone. And so we get rid of this whole, were you negligent? The question is, was it avoidable? Is it avoidable or unavoidable? An avoidable action is when we say, okay, you probably should have known that if you routed that header pipe that close to the firewall, that there could be a fire, a combustible issue that could cause the car to catch fire. Okay, that was an avoidable issue, right? And so for us, the strategy we try to take with our clients is educate themselves, educate every business owner of how can they ultimately avoid risk of ever needing their policy. And it starts off with, if you're going to sell parts, who manufactures it? And is it insured? And now you can't do that for every part you sell, and nor do we intend it to. But I could tell you that if you're going to be a large supplier or you're a reseller of, let's say, one company's kit, whether it be a turbo upgrade or a supercharger kit, you can ask them for a certificate of insurance. You can say, look, I'm willing to sell your product and I'll stand behind our work as it relates to the labor side of the business, and we're doing all the tuning. But if there's a problem with the part where there's imminent failure as a result of the product failing due to a flaw in your manufacturing, I want you to be responsible for that. And so I'd like you to show me a certificate of insurance. Now, you could also say, look, if you're going to be an exclusive distributor for that manufacturer, you can say, let's go ahead and form a contract and let's have a bilateral agreement that I want you to name us as an additional insured. Because ultimately, as a manufacturer, their general liability form has an automatic extension called a broad form vendor's extension that gives additional insured status to anybody that resells their parts. And the intent of the endorsement is to create commerce between the manufacturer and their distribution channels. And the problem is it's cumbersome. A lot of jobbers and installers say, look, I'd go crazy if I had to get every part I sell to name me as additional insured. And we always say you don't have to have every part. But on your most mission critical parts where criticality can cause sudden overturn or upset of the vehicle, when vehicles lose control and they end up on their roof, only bad things happen to the occupants of the vehicle.
Right.
So what we try to say is if you're selling mission criticality, if you're selling tires, wheels, brakes, steering, suspension, something that could cause combustibility issues, if your fuel tank systems, fuel systems, you should ask those manufacturers to show that they carry product liability and keep those on record inside your insurance file. Why? Because if there's a major issue, a car that explodes, a car that's lost control and ends up on the side of the road upside down, you want to be able to say, hey, look, Franco, I've got a claim. We're going to open a case on behalf of our client, and we're going to apply an adjustment that says, let's peel back this onion now, and let's do a forensic adjustment to decide why did this vehicle lose control. And let's say we find out that a pitman arm broke, or a spindle broke, and you go, well, you could just see the stress crack in the metallurgy that this spindle was flawed from the beginning, and that's what caused this wheel to come off, and that's why this car is ended up upside down. We say, great, we're now going to subrogate against the responsible party. Who's your spindle supplier? Now there's crickets. Well, I'm sorry, who'd you buy the part from? Well, I don't know. I bought it from a distributor who bought it from this person, and the manufacturer might be in Asia. Okay, Now we've hit a dead end. Now we have no other financial recourse to help adjust that claim. And that just means, you know what, we're going to pay that claim. And that ends up on our client's loss run, and we'll just have to deal with the fact that was an unfortunate circumstance. But getting understanding for our clients that want to sell parts and install parts of who their partnerships are is a key component to identifying what the process looks like of them managing their own risk. When do they get additional insured status from their key suppliers? For instance, my clients that want to sell safety equipment, if you're not asking from that safety equipment supplier standpoint to get a certificate of insurance naming you as additional insured, you're playing roulette with your company. Because there's been a lot of changeover in the safety equipment space. Companies have gotten bought, companies have gone out of business, and unfortunately, there's a lot of parts coming from overseas, and I have nothing against outsourced manufacturing from a global economy standpoint. I really don't. I've got nothing but positive things to say about stuff that's being produced overseas. The only negative is if there's no domestic liability coverage following that product, and you can't locate the importer of origin of the distributor that's taking responsibility, and that distributor doesn't take responsibility of buying product liability, if it ends up in the consumer marketplace and you're the first person that they're going to call, and there's no other attachable coverage, now our poor retailers, our jobbers, our installers are the only ones that are going to foot the bill, and they're going to be the only ones standing in the courtroom adjusting those claims. And we've seen it on floor mat sales where pedal entrapment has been a challenge, with inadvertent acceleration and pedal entrapment allegations. We've seen it on drive-by-wire technology, throttle body component manufacturers. We've seen major litigation on tire challenges. We've had claims on performance where bad things have happened. And the bottom line is you just have to know who you are and who you're representing, what parts you're selling. And there's some great manufacturers in Australia. There's great manufacturing in Europe. But you know what? They're not here in the U.S. And if they're not in the U.S. and they don't carry general liability coverage, then these retailers have to open their eyes to, okay, is my policy really the sole defense? And if it is, that's fine. Just know that. Know that going in, that we could have to pay a big claim, even though the product that failed had nothing to do with the work performed. Because there's two allegations. There's wrongful installation, the allegation that you did something physically wrong to my vehicle, and that's why it was the injury or the damages occurred. And then there's product failure. The product actually failed. And if you're really a retailer just installing third-party goods, then that product failure, that risk should be borne by another company, the company that supplied the part to you.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's pretty important. And I got to ask this. So, and this topic has come up in our little the Facebook group for the Do It for Living community. But the question is, you guys don't require people to have the general liability insurance for the parts they are selling, but you say that it's a plus. Now, on these key components that you're talking about, so like wheels, tires, suspension, fuel systems, is that something that a shop should be like? I mean, it sounds to me like you're saying that they should only be selling products that do have that kind of coverage for those key areas. Is that correct?
It's an extremely important risk strategy that our clients enter into commerce with companies' eyes wide open. And it's interesting. You mentioned wheels. The wheel dynamic is fascinating. You realize you can email a CAD design over to one of the plants in mainland China, and you could have you could be in the wheel business in less than 3 months and selling your own private brand. So as a result of clients that want to resell product, the retail end side of the business is they have to understand who's representing the product liability associated with that item. And what we try to do is we try to educate, and we try to stimulate the motivation of risk strategy, and we give them the tools to do it. We have template letters that allows them to make the request of getting a certificate of insurance. We try to educate them on what it looks like to track that progress of what do I do with all these certificates now, and where do I keep them? We will archive that information into our file. So, because remember, you're responsible for technically these goods. I hate to say it, but certain states have statutory limitations, but for the most part, it's the life of the product, the expected life use. And so the claims that we see aren't, at times people say, oh, well, if it's going to fail 6 days after the guy takes his car home. Well, not necessarily. It might happen 6 years after your repair. So we try to educate them as what does their archives need to look like on their invoices. One of the most vulnerable things we think our garage owners tend to overlook is the power of documentation. I had a vehicle rollover where a young lady lost her only born child. It was a J-hook issue out in Texas, and in South Texas is a difficult litigation platform for us to really fight and be successful going to trial. And long story short, she went in to buy some custom wheels and tires and elected, she could only afford 2 at the time. And so she only bought 2, left, and inevitably the 2 tires she needed, her older tires, were bald. One of them gave way, and that was what caused the J-hook. And in her argument, her defense, the law firm she had alleged that when she went in to buy the Ford wheels and tires, that she said the counter clerk said that she did not need to buy the 2 front tires and wheels, that she was good just buying the 2 that she bought, even though the counter person specifically said they recalled that she could not afford to buy the other 2 custom tires and wheels and was going to come back later to buy them. And as a result, there was none of that conversation documented on invoice. And documentation is our greatest defense. And our clients do a horrible job documenting what the consumer's expectation is. What is their desired intent? What are they trying to achieve? Is it a horsepower output? Is it a ride height? What are they? And what was the agreement? How much are they willing to? What is the agreement on the price? And when do they make those payments? And like a contractor who contracts to build a house, and then the consumer or the homeowner says, "Hey, look, I changed my mind. I want these windows." They've got to do change orders to make that progress change documented within their contract. And if they don't, they can be very responsible with what they've taken on. A build on a car is no different than a building a home. And our clients, unfortunately, we try to educate them that they have to document the entire process and progress so they can go into it eyes wide open. But for us, risk strategy is just talking openly about it, and then are there contracts that are driving their enterprise? I can't tell you how many times I get the phone call, "Hey, we're going to get a dollar car from Ford because we're going to do a show vehicle at SEMA." And I said, "Have you read that contract?" "Yeah, there's a lot of things in here that I'm not sure I'm covered for." "Send it to us. Let me tell you where your policy might have limitations on how you're going to comply with that agreement now you're forming with Ford or Toyota to do a show vehicle." And the same thing goes with race sponsorship. We get a lot of phone calls from our clients that say, "Hey, look, I want to sponsor a race team. What does that look like to me? How am I implicated now in that environment of racing? And how do I use my expertise to be a performance extension of that race team?" Maybe they do all of the suspension tuning in order to get the car to that race. These are conversations we're having on a daily basis with our clients.
Awesome. And so, Franco, you have agreed to follow up with us more. And what we really want to do is we want to get some feedback from our listeners, and you can post on our Facebook page or email us or whatever you want. Questions that you may have concerning the insurance, because obviously I think we've barely scratched the surface here and we're already an hour into this thing. And so yeah. I want people to let us know what they think, questions they may have, and we'll put together kind of some future topics that Franco can answer, so we can kind of follow up with specifics. Like the manufacturing one, to me, is important, and you touched on it here, but I feel like there's still a lot more to talk about in it. And so, Franco, you can come back here and we can do this like once a quarter or once a month or however often we need to cover these topics, right? That was what you were hinting at?
Yeah, I mean, we're really excited about taking an approach that's educationally based. Nobody wants to sit through an insurance dissertation. But what we want to do is where there's a peak of interest to expand upon the topic. So I always say that my goal is to make my clients a better consumer of insurance. That if I help them understand why they buy it and what they buy, whether they're buying it from me or they're buying it from somebody else, I'm building a better business owner. And so, again, not to go into insurance dissertation 101, nobody wants to sit through that. But if I could give them 5 tips to avoiding a garage keeper's claim, or 3 tips you need to know before you buy a garage liability policy, I think these are valuable topics that every business owner at one point in time is going to need to know before they decide to go out and buy an insurance policy.
Definitely. Okay, so there's one more question I wanted to ask before we close this one out here. you touched on shops looking for their manufacturer, the parts that they're selling, their general liability policy. Is there like a community resource that you can go and pull all these like insurance forms for all the people that are, in particular, I say this because I buy a vast majority of my parts through wholesale distributors who may sell, 200 different manufacturers' parts. My assumption is they have all those little insurance for each individual manufacturer. And maybe that's just because that's, in order for them to sell it, they have to have insurance. How do I go and get all those same manufacturers' insurance policy as the parts that I'm selling?
I mean, ideally, if you're buying from a direct distributor, the goal would be to ask your distributor to show a certificate of insurance, and you have that on record. That's the best you could do, with trying to make sure that your upline, what is the upline? The upline is all my source suppliers. Okay. If you're buying direct, just ask the manufacturer for a certificate of insurance showing product liability. The best thing, the most rewarding thing I think that can come from it, one is, of course, if you get that certificate, you have it on file. Mm-hmm. That's the ultimate. That's a game. But what also is enlightening is if, when in the process of asking, there's a deliberate intent to not provide it, or they honestly say, hey, look, we don't carry product liability. We just don't. It's just not affordable. Wouldn't you want to know that now prior to a claim occurring? Right. And so have those candid conversations with people, because I can't tell you how many companies, high-profile companies, that when the economy was falling and the sky was falling, they went without product liability because they needed to do what's best for their business, and getting rid of product liability coverage is one way to save money. Now, today, with the economy flourishing, I can't imagine any manufacturer going without coverage. But again, isn't it better to ask that question ahead of time?
Definitely. Okay, so Franco, we're at right around an hour here, so let's go ahead and close out. So how do we connect with you and your company?
I would think the best way, if you really just want to learn more about Special Equipment Insurance Alliance, you could go to SEIAinsurance.com. That's SEIAinsurance.com. If anyone ever forgets that URL, you could probably Google aftermarket insurance or special equipment insurance or performance auto parts insurance. I think we're number one in Google in all those categories. Ideally, you can always go to SEMA.org and click on member services. Or if they want to call direct, I can tell you we spend countless hours on the phone consulting that never really results in us selling a policy. Our commitment to SEMA is to help build better business. And so they could call 800-390-9099. That's 800-390-9099. Give us a call. It's consultative. We review contracts. We'll read your policy. We'll tell you what you're buying. And again, if it ends up the result is us doing business together, then fantastic.
Perfect. And we'll share all these links and the phone number on our webpage as well. So if people are listening to this and don't have time to write it down, just go to doitforliving.net and you can check it out there. And Franco, I really appreciate you taking some time, and I look forward to talking to you more in the future.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Do It for a Living. You can find out more about this guest, this show, and even details about what we just talked about at our website, doitforaliving.net. Check out the Facebook page at facebook.com/doitforaliving and tell us who you want to hear from. And most importantly, subscribe to the podcast. Click subscribe. Do it now. Seriously.